Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dragon Talk. We are live
Yay!
from GaryCon in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, the place where Dungeons and Dragons was born. We are here celebrating, the life of Gary Gygax, but of course, all of gaming in its entirety going on here at the Grand Geneva Resort. It's been pretty great the last few days. I am Greg Tito. I'm joined by Shelly Mazanoble.
Hello.
Hi,
Good
Shelly.
morning.
How did your stream game go last night?
No, it was really fun. And
It
you know
was-
what? I have some fears about streaming.
Yes, I didn't.
don't-
But you end up doing it every day now.
I'm trying to push myself. I cannot teach my child about overcoming his fears if I don't overcome my own.
That's beautiful. It's
Your child has fears of streaming?
Yes.
Yeah, he's got fears.
You know,
of it
he's
too.
like the opposite. Like his whole life has been a live stream. From ever since we had a crib cam on him and his grandma was watching him every morning.
posting
to
it on
FaceTime.
YouTube.
Yeah. He's like, Mommy, seriously, what's the big deal? But
We
it was
are,
really fun.
of course, joined by Zeb Cook as well. Hello.
Yay!
Oh, hi there. I can't see any of you, but hi.
They are
Welcome.
there.
We will love to pick your brain over the next hour about all of the fun design and or just gaming stories you have to regale all of us.
All the mild disasters that happened.
We're going to
things
put a
like
little Bailey's in that coffee and get you really
There
talking.
we go.
That's how we get the good interviews. It happens. So welcome. I overheard you saying earlier you've been to a few Gary Cons.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many. I think the first one I came to was the third, and then basically went through a number there. And then I try to get to them every year, but sometimes other things in life take precedence, and I can't. I do love this convention. It's a very comfortable, relaxing, and fun place, and so I have a good time.
Awesome.
That's good.
I do too. I think the last time I was here was I think the third one as well.
Oh, my.
So it was at a different location, right? It was not at this
Oh,
location.
that was over at, I think it was at the Ridge or
Yeah.
yeah, it was this tiny little lodge, and could probably, the convention could probably hold about 300, 400 people at most.
And it has grown since then. But I like that it still has that smaller convention feel. It doesn't, and then this one in particular just had a lot of folks who either still live in the area here in Lake Geneva, worked at TSR, and it ends up being that reunion feel we were
Oh
talking
yeah, one of the big fun things for me and for my wife also is we get to come and see lots of old friends because we lived out here for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's a good chance for us to reconnect with people that we get to see once a year at best.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that kind of reunion feel.
So coming back here to Lake Geneva and seeing everybody, like, does it feel like it just takes you back in time, or is it just like...
It
oh,
does a
you're
bit,
back?
except that, frankly, I'm not, neither of us really want to go kind of like, oh, look, let's go look at our old house, because that'll either depress us or we'll go, oh my God, what a dump it's become,
I can't believe they painted it that color.
They put too much furniture in the foyer. Dang it. I'm sure your house had a foyer. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah, right.
Awesome. So many people know you as a designer. I believe you were one of the lead designers of Second Edition. Is that correct?
I was the lead designer on Second Edition, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you've had a huge influence on the Dungeons and Dragons game over the years. When did you first start playing though? What was that experience
So
like?
I started playing and it's a little, I'm old, it gets a little fuzzy here. It was either late 74 or 75. I think it was probably 75. I was in college, and basically I had been playing games for years prior to that in through junior high school and high school. But it was mostly war games, and there was no such thing as a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And so I was in this this war game club at the college, and one day, some guy was, they had found Dungeons and Dragons, and he and his group had started playing, and the word got around that, hey, there's this really interesting game, and hey, so I got myself invited into one of those, and it was like, holy crap, this is amazing.
What was it that you found that was...
Well, it was. I was a theater minor. I was an
you're
English
an
major.
Oh, theater majors over
major.
here.
I was an English major and theater minor, and
That was
so
me
it's like,
too.
hey, this is like storytelling. I
Yeah.
understand this.
And acting.
And a little bit of acting. I was a terrible actor.
You
I
could
was.
practically say it was like part of your college education.
But
It's like studying.
It
Yeah,
was,
exactly.
It was a lot. Yeah, studying took up a lot more than my studying should have. But
That's great. I was an English major and a theater studies major at the same time.
yeah,
so.
that's what else you're going to do in your English, though.
Yeah.
It's like, hi, I'm unemployable.
Yeah.
I was like,
Well,
I
you
have
to
2
make
useless
yourself
degrees
doubly
now. How am I going to
employable.
use these in the future? It's going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons, apparently. So yeah, do you remember were you the dungeon master of that first game, or did someone?
No,
bring
I
you
was.
in?
I had never even seen the rules at that point, and so they said, here's have me. I created a dwarf, and it played for a session, and it promptly died. And I think I played another session with another dwarf, and it promptly died. And I think about the third or fourth character, they were all dwarves for some reason. I was kind of fixated here.
Why did you like the dwarves
but
so much?
I named him Fred 9807 because, and my explanation was that was basically the first one out of the family that had really survived long enough.
Nice.
And then after that, got a hold of a copy of the rules, and that was literally going off to the local college bookstore and finding it way back in some buried in the back of the place in their small game section, because there was no such thing as a game section. It was in the here's all the other oddities that we carry kind of stuff.
Other
Stuff. Now found it and proceeded to work through the relatively pretty hard to pretty incomprehensible rules if you'd never run into anything like role playing or miniatures gaming or anything like that. In fact, I ran an original D&D session here. That was basically just the 3 books and I had to go, find a copy of them because I don't even have them anymore. Fortunately, thank God for PDFs. And you go
Digital
reading through them,
preservation
and
is a
you go
thing.
reading through them, and you go like, how did we ever figure this out?
I felt the same way. I mean, I've used this a lot, but back in the day, they felt very like, you had to have a lot of assumed knowledge ahead of time. Again, you had to have like a familiarity with wargaming to a certain extent. And if you think about it now, like nobody ever learned how to play basketball or baseball by reading a manual.
Oh, God, no.
Because
yeah.
if you read those manuals, they're really incomprehensible. You're like, I don't understand where the ball and the movement and the forward and the blah, blah, blah. And I think like Dungeons & Dragons was like that a lot too, where people just kind of experience it, and then the rules were able to be references afterwards if you wanted to check stuff. And I like that now it's switched, and that a lot of people watch role-playing games for the first time before they've read the book, and that gives them that...
Oh, yeah, that's the amazing
frame of
thing about
reference.
the streaming stuff these days is you can actually get on and you can see what's going on. Because for years at TSR, we were always grappling, well, how do we get people into the game? We got to get in, frankly, we would try to do all these, manuals that were, easy to parse and teach you the game. But ultimately, the answer was always, you've got to get in and actually, play or see somebody play. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this all makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
All that
still
other
tell
stuff,
people
all those
that.
rules and numbers, that's unimportant.
Yeah.
And we still tell people that.
Yeah,
Like,
it
just,
is,
Just start
yeah.
playing. Don't worry about the rules. Somebody's going to show you.
And so if you can see how to play, it's really good.
I forgot we had to. I want to tweet us that we were out there. So I'm going to continue to talk to you while I'm doing social media at the same time. That's what English and theater majors can do.
Right.
Wow.
I don't know.
Multitask.
Exactly right. I'm the only people who can do that. So after your first foray into playing as dwarves, and why were you fixated on dwarves? Do you think?
I don't know. I wasn't taken by elves, and humans were kind of boring. So that if you had just the original D&D, your choices were really limited. So dwarves were good, and I could be grumpy and stomp around and stuff like that, which made for easy characterization.
Were you like a Tolkien fan? So did you have some thoughts about dwarves from then? Or?
I don't know. I had read a lot of variety of fantasy, Tolkien, and everything else, and so I think it was just. But I was also, being an English major and history buff. I had all this kind of like Scandinavian saga stuff and other weird things that I had read. So it's like, oh yeah, dwarves make those I understand.
Those are my people.
Yes. So you continued playing throughout the rest of college?
Yeah, I played through college, and actually we 1 year made an expedition, a bunch of us, up to Gen Con when it was at the Horticulture Hall.
Oh, just
which,
heard
mind
about
you,
those.
this is like a several 100-mile road trip for a bunch of college students.
How'd you hear about it?
Well, we had, I don't even know. One of the guys I think had been the year before and had said, "Hey, this thing is going on," because I think this was pre-Dragon when we had heard about this when we did this, or it might have been in very early years of Dragon magazine. So yeah, we went up to the horticulture hall, and it was a tiny place. I think people don't realize just how small the whole convention was. It was, this building which just, you can barely fit probably about 50 tables in the whole thing or something like that at most. Probably I'm exaggerating that. And that was, I think, the year that Judges Guild first showed up and was putting stuff out, and we were like, "Oh man, this is amazing! Look at this giant map!" And it was like, wait, well, the adventure is like just there's no real adventure, but there was a giant map, so we were all really thrilled.
Maps bring you in; they really do.
It was I think it was their city-state thing or something like that, and you just looked at it and it's like, wow, I can do stuff with that. I don't know what I can do with it, but I can do stuff with that. And so they got our money.
You're like, I'm going. I'm in. Yep. That's it. That's cool. And then, how did you make your transition from being, a fan, attending Gen Con to working at TSR?
So, as I finished my English degree, and then you realize you're unemployable, the only thing you do is you go off to be a teacher, and so I went off to be an English teacher, and it was out in Nebraska, in the middle of kind of no offense to Nebraska, but it was kind of the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. I was teacher in a town of 300 people.
What was it called? What was the town called?
Milligan.
Milligan, okay.
Milligan, Nebraska.
I got stranded in Kimball, Nebraska.
Okay, well, you were in a big town then.
Oh, yeah, yeah, right. Didn't feel like it at the time.
But, so I was the entire English department from, like, grade 9 through 12.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and there were 125 students in the entire school, kindergarten to high school. So
wow.
So it was great. You had small classes, but you had no resources or anything like that.
Yeah.
I did that for about 2 years, and then in, I guess, must have been about late 78 or early 79, Dragon Magazine ran an ad basically saying, they were looking for designers. And my wife, bless her, said, sure, go ahead and apply for this. I introduced her to gaming, and she liked it a lot too. So I basically wrote off and sent a resume and expressed my interest. Got back then this list of 20 questions that I had to answer about, how well do I understand all the obscurities of different pole arms, what's the stats for this sort of thing on this, and then they wanted a writing sample too. So I spent some time and wrote a little adventure thing and sent it off. And to my amazement, they eventually kind of called up and said that they would like to have me out for an interview. So, I went to do that. That in itself was kind of an interesting process because this was when TSR was very small. They probably had only about less than 20 employees or so at the time. Okay. And, mind you, many of those employees were like Gary and his family members and all this sort of stuff who were doing things, and that included the hobby shop people and all this sort of stuff. But went there and basically had to convince them that they had to pay for the flight because, hey, I'm a teacher and I can't afford to fund that money up front. And
that was before that was kind of standard practice.
Right. Yeah, that was before any of this was kind of like, before, people who worked this out. And got there and waited on the street corner at outside the London Hobby Shop, and Gary and his wife.
Here in Lake Geneva?
Yeah, here in Lake Geneva. Gary and his wife eventually drove up, picked me up, went to their house or went to their offices and did interview and that sort of stuff, and then went to his house and did more interview into the evening, I guess, and talked. And instead of putting me up at a hotel, I wound up sleeping on a couch on his porch. It was kind of a sleeper couch kind of a thing. And what did I know? This seemed perfectly normal and fine. I was young. Well, it did seem a little odd, but it was that's, I guess, the way things were done. And then, to my amazement, they called back at some weeks later and said, I had the job if I wanted it. And the only trick was I was going to have to take a pay cut. And mind you, I was a teacher in Nebraska, which was one of the lowest paid states for teachers.
Right.
And so I was going to get even less money than that. But
Tabletop gaming. It's
basically kind of checked with wife and spoke with my family, my parents, to say, hey, if I need to, can you help me out here? And thanks to all of them, we were able to say, yes, we can do this. And then it was load everything up in one little truck, because we didn't have much at that point, and drive to Lake Geneva with my wife and son.
Wow.
Yeah.
How old was your son?
He was probably, I think, about that point, about a year old or so.
Wow.
Wow.
Few months,
That's
very
huge.
young.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe even less. Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
So then, we got there, and the rest was getting started and going.
What was your first kind of task as being an employee there?
My first tasks were basically to do some editorial and development on stuff that was, help out with some of the proofreading, because they were just at that point in '79, they were putting out I believe it was the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide. I can't remember which one came out that year. And so they were just doing the final touches on that. I started in July. Gen Con was in August, and they were releasing it in August. So there was a mad rush to kind of get everything proofread and all this sort of stuff.
They printed so fast.
Just
think about our lead time.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And then so, a lot of that, and then a lot of, I did like development editorial work on the Queen of the Demon Web Pits. And finally, eventually got to actually, write a real module that I think that came out in the next year. But that was, headed off after that.
Wow. And you were the writer of Isle of Dread, right?
Oh, yeah. Tom and I wrote Isle of Dread, and he wrote the basic set, and I wrote the expert rules. That was probably one of the first really big significant things worked on. And so Isle of Dread was cooperative. It was a joint effort between he and I, because basically we had so much work we had to get done. He already had an adventure that was going into the basic set, because they were just going to put the same adventure in Search of the Unknown was going into that. Mm-hmm. But we needed a new adventure to go with the expert set, and I was spending a lot of my time trying to get the expert set done. So he basically, we decided to split up the work on Isle of Dread between us so we could get it done, because, again, deadlines were pretty horrible. Yeah, so it's like, can you guys get this all done in about, I think it was probably 6 months or so to do the designs. I exaggerate, it was probably a little bit more than that. But then also get the module written and everything. So there was some frantic work.
Yeah.
Sure. So you were about the 20th or so employee.
I was the 24th employee.
employee.
When I finally was hired, yes.
And we know that TSR grew to eventually 300 or so?
Yeah, it grew to a lot of people.
A lot of people.
A lot of people.
So you were there through all of this growth?
I was there for 15 years, so I went through a whole lot of their cycles of things.
So what was that like? What are some of the big milestones you remember in terms of growth?
In terms of growth, the milestones were getting the Random House. Finally getting the Random House deal. That really started. Suddenly, then it was like, oh wow, we're actually selling things. This is kind of significant and everything.
When was that? Just out of curiosity.
That would have been in the early '80s, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, my knowledge and memory of dates on these things get a little fuzzy.
No worries. That's why you're a.
And then then they started branching out.
pictures.
They started branching out into like the choose your own adventure books. And then that
Careful,
turned into the proper
Pick Your Path books.
Pick Your Path books. Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
I'm sure you've gotten a letter or two in your past.
And then basically that turned into the book department, and it was suddenly
and that was
like
all in-house.
And most all that was done in house. Yes, we had the first couple of books. I'm sure Margaret and Tracy can talk much more about that than I can.
Right. Yes, we'll be talking to Margaret on Sunday.
Yeah, there you go.
Should be fun.
And but yeah, so it was doing a lot of that, and then there were all of these attempts to branch the company out away from Dungeons and Dragons, first into other role-playing games, and that was fun because we all had like other genres we liked, and so we convinced them to do either good ideas or some really crazy ideas.
What were
And-
some of the craziest that you championed? Were you like a top secret person? Or?
Well, Top Secret was Merle, and we enjoyed Top Secret, and that was a good solid game. But later on, we did the Conan role playing game. I did the Indiana Jones role playing game, which was, oh my God, there's stories to that one.
Can you tell any of them?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, so the Indiana Jones role playing game. This was after the first movie, but before the second movie had been released, and so they basically came to us and wanted to know, or I don't know who came to who. I think they came to us and wanted to know if we were interested in doing a game, and we said sure. Now, LucasArts had never dealt with a role-playing game before, and they have a very fierce kind of a licensing operation. And so, we looked at this as like pulp game, big signature heroes, nice, interesting, colorful world. We can do tons with this. We can have a great time, right?
Yeah.
And so I basically proceeded to do the design for it. We wanted to keep it a fairly simple, fast-playing game, and it's like it's 1930s pulp. I loved pulp stuff, so it was all great.
Yeah, that first movie almost feels like a D&D adventure.
Oh yeah, I mean
even how things fall apart, plans don't work out the way they were supposed to, and then there's a big bad kind of climactic moment that the dungeon master does at the end.
It's kind of a model for how to put together a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And so when we started doing this, and as we got going doing this, we found out from them the biggest thing that we got from them is that no, you aren't going to be able to create any original material. You have to basically you can only use what's appeared in the movies, or you could use what had been written in the Marvel comics. Everything had to be approved by Lucas, and he didn't have time to look at anything new. So we could only use published material, so we couldn't create, modules and new adventures, right? Then they came down with the real hammer, which was that and that meant you can't let players create characters. They have to play. They can only play existing.
So you
iconic characters.
Indiana Jones or nothing else?
Indiana Jones, no character creation system.
Wow.
Yeah, and we were like, we argued with them a long time about this and just said, look, this is, you don't understand how role-playing games work. They were adamant. This is how it had to be. So it was like, great, we'll do this. We'll provide them, with all these pre-generated characters, and I'm going to put in a really detailed NPC generation system in the back.
Oh, nice.
And hope that people notice it, because we can't really even say, oh, by the way, you can go do this, right? And so we had that, and then the first movie hadn't been out, and the second movie hadn't been out, and we're going, well, since we can only use stuff, the game was coming out after the second movie, so we wanted to basically incorporate as much of that in as we could, and they were fine. That's great. It'll help. Helping promote the movie is really good. Great. Can you send us a script? No, we cannot send you a script. Nobody sees the script. Nobody sees the script outside of absolute strict controls. So great. How do we do this then? Well, you guys can fly out to California to Marin County, and we'll let you read this. We'll let you read the script. Okay, great. We'll do that. Right. So we get there. It was me and the guy who was going to write the adventure. I think it was Tracy. It was either Tracy or it was Jeff. That was it.
Jeff Grubb?
It was either Tracy or Jeff Grubb. I honestly can't remember which now. So we get there, and they proceed to give us one copy of the script, right? They lock us in a room, in a conference room. We have a day to go through it, and they won't let us take notes.
Oh.
Oh, my God.
So we read through the script and are basically trying to memorize as much as we can.
Committed to memory.
Yes. So that we can at least have something that, kind of okay, what can we use out of this? What can I include in the rules? This sort of stuff.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was, and, I'm really sad about the game because the game rules and the system were good and the setting was great. It's just that we didn't get all of the things that you really needed to make it really take off. I think they learned a lot from that, though, because they were much more flexible on Star Wars later on when friends of mine had to work on that one.
They were able to understand that, you have to give up a little bit of control.
Oh, they gave up. They actually did a lot more on that.
Yeah. They probably were thinking about it like a board game, or
I think they've never dealt with role playing games
exactly.
before.
Yeah. Well, things have changed a lot since then, so that's really fascinating. When were the first kind of whisperings about second edition beginning, and when did you kind of take the reins?
So the first whisperings about second edition probably started, and it was very vague, about the time of that Gary did, what was it, Unearthed Arcana, because it was like, hey, here I'm, this was the first idea that, hey, he really was, thinking about major changes, expansions to stuff, and then we did a whole bunch of these other books. Oriental Adventures came next, and then Wilderness Adventures and all these others. And, the need kind of kept building up as we're adding a lot more rules. Some of them are good, and we'd really like to incorporate. Others are maybe not, and we want to kind of like maybe not incorporate them. And so he then had started, and he was working with, I don't know how far he had gotten on stuff, but then all of this, all of the business and management and changes and stuff had happened. And so he was, at that point, no longer directly involved. Or actually, he was still involved. I take it back. My time frame is bad. He was still involved, but he was very busy. And so it was, needs somebody to put this together. I had been there kind of the longest of the designers, and he trusted me, which was a fine compliment. And so basically I was tasked with kind of coming up with this and writing it. A lot of it was spent in time in consultation. I would come up with things, and I would make sure that they were kind of run by him and that sort of stuff. And so there was a lot of back and forth. But in the process of all that, then chaos kind of ensued also and other sorts of things. And so as he kind of moved out of the picture. And then we continued the process and this sort of stuff, and I'm probably getting this all wrong. I may be thinking about Oriental Adventures when I was talking about consulting with him.
Well, when you work on so many products and so many different design processes, I totally understand.
But there was a lot of consultation with with the rest of the design team and everything, and so I think at this point, By the time we were done, he was no longer associated.
Right.
And
what was that? What did that feel like in the
that
office?
felt like us mostly trying to stay out of the path of all of this, because we were just essentially employees, and we kind of kept our heads down through a lot. We'd already gone through in the mid '80s, went from 300 to 100 and some people. So you tended to be like, let's not get involved in management battles if we can help it.
I see. So you guys are kind of heads down. Let's just make the games as good as we can make them.
We had plenty. We had a schedule that put out like 100 some products a year between the design department and magazines.
100 products, Shelley.
Yeah. We used to do that back in Wizards.
Yeah.
When we used to publish novels, we would have like 5 novels and then like 7 D&D books and then kid books.
12 issues of Dragon Magazine.
Yeah.
And, all this sort of stuff. And so
all of this with the smaller employee pool?
Yeah, that was the thing, is that we went from 300 people down to 117 or something like that, and our schedule didn't change.
Yeah.
So we started doing a lot more outsourcing, but we also basically, worked at getting more efficient, and in some ways, it was kind of like a factory. It was kind of like you knew how long it would take to do roughly a module will take roughly this many months. You knew the processes you need to. Okay, first you do this, then it'll go da, and so there was a whole kind of like assembly chain line of it. But you wanted to be creative while you did it too.
Yeah.
That's often the battle.
So it was a very good training experience for a lot of people. And it's also one of the reasons why I've hired a lot of as many former game designers as I can into video game stuff.
Oh, really? Yeah, because they have the experience of working under tight deadlines.
Oh, yeah,
and delivering creative material on time.
Yeah, and they have that experience of like, okay, I'm turning this over. Oh, wait, we've got to make changes. Okay, I can make changes. We can do that. They don't.
They go with the flow.
They go with the flow. They don't get too stressed about a lot of things, and they're adaptable.
Iteration is the name of the game. Yeah, right?
It's like I can hand you. Oh, by the way, we're going to do this. Okay, let me figure out how we'll do that.
What was the vibe like in Lake Geneva around TSR and like the work that you were doing?
Oh my God! And especially in the early days, you had a lot of young guys, and we were almost all guys, and most of us all in our 20s, many of us unmarried, and working for not a whole lot of money. So we were a group of people that could get ourselves into all sorts of amusing trouble and have fun. We had the police show up one time because there were reports of a sniper in the building because we all had like plastic rifles and guns and this sort of stuff. And we were running around, little dart guns and Nerf guns, and we were running around on our third floor, shooting each other and like late one day. And I guess my understanding is one of them was standing near a window holding his plastic rifle, and somebody on the street saw this, and then the next thing you know, it's like this goes on.
Oh, dear.
We got a memo the next day that all the plastic guns had to go home. So the solution was they all just went into drawers.
Memos. Obviously Wizards of the Coast took over a lot of stuff from TSR, and some of them were old binders of memos that were from the old, what's it called? The letterhead with the old logo with the wizard on it, and some of them were like, we got to make sure we turn off the heat in the bathroom or make sure that it was turned on. It was like this 3-page memo about how the bathrooms were too cold and they needed to be warmer.
You gotta find the memo about you gotta take your guns home.
Yeah, so no, that's what I want to find.
But yeah, we had a lot. It was a company that was learning how to be a business because basically it was founded by Gary and a bunch of other people who were not like expecting to turn it into a big multi-million operation at any point, and so there was a lot of learning processes for all of us,
right?
Going through that, and we were in this 3-story. Old hotel in downtown Lake Geneva. The Dungeon Hobby Shop was on the first floor. The shipping department was in the basement along with the game room. And then the second floor was kind of the administrative offices and I think the education department. Because we did do educational kind of product stuff.
What kind of
too.
education stuff did you guys do?
They were trying to work ways to get kind of D&D into into schools kind of stuff, and then the education department kind of turned into the book department over time. And then on the third floor was like design and editing. The artists were on the second floor, and Dragon Magazine was in the old original offices that were halfway across town.
Oh, I see.
And this hotel was, it was kind of a dump. None of the floors were level.
Really?
Doors all kind of angled it slightly differently and kind of would open in different directions and that sort of stuff. At one point, one of the guys, there were holes in the floor. There was a hole in the floor on the third floor that you could look down to the second floor.
Oh, gosh.
Wow. And there was a fourth floor ballroom that was closed off completely. We weren't, it had a locked door to get up to it because it was completely unsafe.
Oh, God.
Man. One Friday, the door was unlocked, and Errol Otis kind of went up there and was like exploring around, and missed a step because he was trying, I think, go from like joist to joist or something like that.
No.
And I'm
really
down the hallway
unsafe.
and I hear this loud crash. And I go back down and find in my office he had fallen through the ceiling and was dangling.
I wish we knew this when we had dinner with him.
I know, right? Yeah, I sat down to dinner and there was Errol Otis was now. I would say, "Oh, hi, I'm Errol." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I know you so much of your work." I would have loved to have asked him what it was like to fall into Zeb Cook's office.
and so thereafter, that office always just had a big patch in the ceiling.
That's very D&D. I mean, you can't have a locked door.
No,
with a bunch of
we
people who
were
make
curious
D&D.
people. It was like, and there was like on the third floor there was like most of us shared office, but like Tom Wam was given an office space up there, even though he wasn't an employee. But he would, Tom would do things, and we would publish them and all that sort of stuff. And generally he kept his office always locked, but every once in a while you'd go in and it's like, wow, this is like a whole little he's got bookshelves and he's got a stereo and he's got
yeah,
all
like
this
his own
stuff.
like little clubhouse. In
Yeah,
there.
it was great.
What was the game room like in the basement? What did that look like?
The game room was basically that's where they had the sand table that actually kind of you can kind of see what if you come to the convention here.
Oh, the actual sand table that was from that game room is here?
It's either that or it's pretty much the
What
same.
is the sand table? I'm not familiar with this.
So a sand table is basically a big box table about the size of the one we're sitting around right now, but for wargame terrain, instead of like doing lots of things with plastic and all this sort of stuff, and, especially in very early days, you filled the entire thing with sand. Kind of damp, slightly damp sand, and then you could shape it into hills and stuff like that. Of course, all your miniatures came out with sand all over them.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But it was the price you pay for being able to be modular and change it up to however you want it to be.
And it's also like the
great.
thing would weigh 1,000 pounds by the time it was filled with sand or something like this. And we had some other tables
thing it was
down
on
there
the
that
first- the basement.
basically we could do miniatures games on and things like
You
that.
don't want that falling into
No,
your
that
office.
on the third floor that would have been a disaster.
They would have
Don't put
fallen
that in the
down
ballroom.
through many floors.
So what did you do about playtesting? Like when you had the new content? Did
So playtesting, a lot of the playtesting was done basically by, we'd just do after hours. We would organize like, hey, I've got this thing, I want to get it tested. We'll run a game and that sort of stuff. So we'd do playtesting amongst ourselves with the group. And to be honest, by the time you had done like 4 or 5 modules or something, a lot of the playtesting turned into more of I'm going to go down the hall and I'm going to propose this situation to you, and what would you do as a party? And then you go back and say, okay, I got to account for that and deal with that. And so you got to the point where you had a very inherent sense of what themes felt like it would be balanced, and our pace was so fast on a lot of the modules that you would do some very minor playtesting, but it was kind of just ingrained into you at that point.
You just went on feel then?
Yeah, we went on feel, and you went on pretty much. You knew, if I do this, it will work. I think what was it for Vecna Lives thing that I did has this infamous opening where I basically give you all of these famous named characters from Greyhawk, and you're off to go investigate this barrow mound. And there's a lich in the barrow mound and everything, and the objective of that whole opening is to kill every one of the player characters. Kill off all these famous named characters, because then you're going to start the real adventure with their lower level hirelings to find out what happened to them, which is I figure a great way to terrify the players right from the start.
Right.
And literally working out how I could do that in a way that was completely fair, but would be pretty much infallible. Right, and mind you, these people had a lot of powers. Was like, okay, the lich, he's a smart lich. What would he do if he's like living in this tomb and everything, and he knows that people may be coming? And so so the playtesting for that was, I would work out this. I would go, sit down with somebody, and we'd kind of go through it, and they'd say, well, what if I do this? And I was like, oh crap, I got to go figure out how to deal for that, right? And got it to the point where most of the time, if you run it well, they're all going to die.
That's used in video games all the time now. The unwinnable battle.
Oh yeah,
I know several of my.
I hate those.
Well, but that's kind of what you made, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you make the first one?
I'm sure. I'm sure we made many unwinnable battles by accident.
This is the first one that was done on purpose.
Yeah, but it was done for. I
all right, so everyone knows. Blame Zeb Cook for that and everything going forward. So getting back to second edition and how was there a design philosophy that you kind of
definitely
put
was
out?
A design philosophy. I think the first design philosophy came from sales and marketing, which is don't ruin our sales.
Okay.
Well, that's always an initiative that sales puts forth.
But that meant, more importantly, don't ruin our sales for all our other product, because we had all those modules and other stuff. So we had to make sure that it was going to be fairly easily compatible with all the stuff that we already had in print and that we had in the warehouse, because they still wanted to be able to sell all those things until such time as they can transition over and build up enough of a second edition line
library,
and that sort of stuff. The other part of it is that we weren't trying to do anything. We weren't trying to be amazingly radical. We were really looking at it as it initially kind of started as we need to do I think Steve Winter really pushed the idea that we need to do an editorial pass and reorganization on first edition, just to make it more accessible, make it better organized, and this sort of stuff. And then that turned into more of a full-blown kind of okay, let's But the goal of that was that it was more intent to kind of we know people have a lot of house rules. We know we put out a lot of expansions. to incorporate that and make it more in line with how people were actually playing the game, after all those years. So it was like I would go to they would send me off to conventions in the as we were getting close to getting completed, and I would basically kind of go over what we're doing, and a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, that's kind of like what we do." And I said, "Perfect, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is just make it a little bit more like the game that you're playing, and then try to work in some good ideas and that sort of stuff." So
interesting. Yeah. So it ended up being like a lot of like, let's get it back to the game that had kind of changed and evolved in the 15 years since it was released in various
it's a natural progression, and you see this with lots of games. If they continue on for a while, they acquire so much stuff kind of around them that you need to do a pass to kind of bring it all together. It's like retconning in comic books and that sort of thing.
What was it like getting those back to those Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook and getting new editions of those kind of in your hand with your name on them?
Well, that was exciting. It's like, oh my God, this has got my name on it. I'm either I'm doomed but I guess I wasn't doomed, so I'm pretty happy.
Well, the doom's coming, eventually. We all get some doom.
So it was a big rush because it was a huge responsibility, and that was kind of scary because.
But you didn't have the internet, so you couldn't
nobody's
have it. Like
at
nobody's gonna like yell at you and bash you, troll
Dragon
you.
magazine was our internet, and Jim Ward actually had me deliberately write a provocative article that got early on about what some of the potential changes might be, in which I basically laid out that we were going to get rid of the assassin and the barbarian and some stuff like that, and then other things that we didn't do, mostly to get people to go like, oh my God,
this is going to be terrible, and then be able to be like, oh, by the way, it's fine.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, good.
Did that work?
Well, it certainly got a lot of oh my God.
Pelor, what is going to happen to these? To my, So, can you talk a little bit about why the assassin and the barbarian were knocked in there?
Well, the barbarian was just really, really overpowered for a lot of what we did. And the other thing is, the way I view them, especially both the assassin and the barbarian, is their mindsets. I can take a fighter and I can play a barbarian by just role-playing that, right? And I don't need to necessarily have a whole bunch of extra abilities. It's just how I choose to play the character. The thing with the assassin is that they were really very difficult for a lot of people to run in a group. It's like, oh, I'm going to go up and assassinate the guy. Well, how are you going to do it? Oh, I'm going to roll on a table. No, that's not assassinating people. You got a plan and all this sort of stuff. That's where the fun of it is. Plus, again, if you think about it, again, anybody, a magic user could be an assassin, fighter could be an assassin. It's again how you approach the play and what you're going to do, and the mindset of it. And plus, assassins were kind of notorious for causing party disharmony.
Yeah.
We kind of move them out in a way. They show up later on in whatever expansions and stuff that got done, but we were trying to focus on making sure that the experience that players had felt like a group experience in many ways. And assassins are very hard to do for that because they want to just go off by themselves and do stuff, and everybody else sitting around while he's doing that, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, I can see that.
What were some of your favorite design elements from second edition?
Oh, wow. Some of the favorite design elements were basically taking the character classes and kind of modularizing them so that you had the ability to create wizards of all different kind of schools and stripes and stuff like that. And you had ways to kind of customize and create clerics based off of the spell sets they had and that sort of thing. Because it was like, and that kind of started from, well, I've got a druid and I've got a cleric. What do they have in common? Pull those elements out, and then how do I explain the differences, and how can I make that work in a more systemic way so that you as a player could go in and like say, oh, I want to make a cleric of this or that sort of stuff, and how I've got an illusionist and I've got a wizard, and can I create other types like that? So a lot of it was things like that. And the other part of it for me was getting the game back more towards the this is your game. These are yes, these are rules, but they're guidelines. They're flexible. You can have a good time with them, and really trying to encourage as much simplicity as possible. But we didn't get as much as I wanted.
Oh, really? Do you want it to be more simple?
Well, I always wanted it to be more simple. Frankly, I like playing with basic and expert because then I can focus more on the moment as the DM. I can focus, and the players can focus more on role playing as opposed to trying to work out like what 18 billion modifiers they have or anything like that.
Interesting.
So
if you play D&D now, you go back and do the basic and expert rather than.
I find it especially useful for conventions because I can. It's small, it's compact, I can travel. That's good. But also, when I sit down with a group at a table at a convention with a bunch of people who I've never played with, it's not a regular gaming group. We don't have to spend a lot of time going over like, oh, this is what my character can do and all this. So you kind of know what your character can do.
That's true.
And people can get right to it right away.
Have you played 5th edition at all?
Yes, I have, and actually, I find it enjoyable.
Good. I feel like a lot of what you're describing.
Yeah, in part because
it
has kind of re-embraced that idea of like, let's go back to focusing on the storytelling and letting people be, come up with imaginatively stupid, heroic things that they want to try to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you don't give them rules for how to do it, they become more imaginatively stupid, which makes for a better game.
Right.
Because they say, oh, nobody says I can't do that.
Why
For sure.
not try it?
Yeah, exactly. So you got second edition out the door. How did you leave TSR? What was the story there?
Second edition out the door was about 89 or so, and I left in 94, I think. 5, one of those two. I think it was 94. I did Planescape as the last really big hurrah thing that I did.
Were you the lead on that as well?
Yes, I was the lead on Planescape.
There was another thing that I wanted to talk to you about.
Well, we'll get back. We can come back to that one. So this is one of those never piss off anybody you work with kind of situations where basically when I got hired into TSR, the person who actually was was the head of the design department was Lawrence Schick, and he was one of the people responsible for hiring me. Lawrence left after a couple of years to go off and work in video games and other stuff. He worked on like ColecoVision and stuff like this.
Wow.
And so in 94, he calls me up and says, I'm basically setting up a studio for a company that wants to get into gaming, video games, and would you like to come and join video games? And at that point, I'd been at TSR 15 years. I had done pretty much all the big things I was probably going to do for a long time, and he would pay me more. So, yes.
Last time you were offered a job, you did not hear that.
Yeah, that was that was a nice surprise.
And I imagine it wasn't in the frozen north.
No, it wasn't. It was an issue of good timing because my son was kind of in between school, junior high school, that sort of stuff, and so moved off into video games and haven't regretted it, but have wound up moving a lot ever since.
Yes, it's not as stable as the 15 years that you can spend at one location.
Yeah, well, I finally, it takes you a while to find a stable place. But and so the amusing part is that the company I'm currently working at, ZeniMax Online, well, I get there, and who do I find working in the office next to me? Lawrence.
Oh, no way.
The guy that first hired you away into the video games world. Oh, my God.
Worlds collide.
Well, I love. And are you working on Elder Scrolls Online?
Actually, I had been up until recently. Now I'm working on an unannounced project.
Very cool. Well,
we've announced that we're doing an unannounced project.
I'm very excited for this unannounced project, whatever it may be.
I can't tell you anything more than that.
we can all guess and pretty much make a probably 90% guess of what that is. But at the same time, I really enjoyed Elder Scrolls Online. I haven't played it, quite as many hours as I would like to, but it has always sucked me in, and it's done a really good job of having a fantasy world to be able to run around.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to work on that. Yes.
And in some ways, technology is caught up with gaming. In some ways, you obviously will never have that experience of a dungeon master who can improvise with you along the way. But
someday
some of these games are getting close to that. And
yeah, we keep
really
trying.
Enjoyable.
And so working on Elder Scrolls Online has been been a lot of fun, and it's really been an interesting challenge in some ways. And I had fun. I had fun leading teams, building spaces.
And I have we're wrapping up, but I have like 4 more questions about how to take your stuff from you learned at TSR and how you're applying it to that, as well as picking your brain more on Planescape. So you have to come back, at least call in to a Dragon Talk episode at some point in the future, and we'll get even more to the bottom of all that. Sound like a plan?
Yes.
That sounds like a plan. I can do that.
All right. Awesome.
All right.
Well, enjoy the rest of your Gary Con. Thank you so much for joining us, for telling as many stories as you were able to. It is the morning
I'm sure,
time.
like I said, I got
scratched
many
the
things
surface.
wrong in the according to them. More I think about it, more I think about the second edition development. It was like, that was more post Gary. I was thinking OA for a bunch of that and that sort of stuff. My brain gets fuzzy after a while.
No worries.
Fine.
I mean, and
We don't fact check.
now that
Zero
we're
fact check.
caffeinating, all the facts are sifting out
They're
into
all
the
fuzzy.
truth
It's
now.
early in the morning.
It's very
It really
early in the
is.
morning for us, but thank you for being here on time and ready to talk. It was a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Well, thank you for having me.
Excellent.
My
We'll be
pleasure.
back after a short break with Penny Williams. Can't wait to talk to her about all of the same era around what's going on at TSR.
Yeah,
So
she'll probably correct a lot
She'll
of my bad
fact check
stories.
you.
she's fact checking right now. Awesome. Thank you. We'll be back after a short break.
Bye.